Some time ago I made a video about Kasm Workspace, a free and open source container streaming platform based on Docker, which allows you to run applications or even entire Linux desktops in an isolated environment easily through your web browser. That is such a cool platform and I enjoy using it for security researching or testing environments, but I didn't cover a pretty important part yet in my videos. Because let's say you like Kasm Workspaces, but it doesn't have an application that you'd like to run, or you might want to customize your Linux desktop containers with your favorite wallpapers, install applications, or inject configuration settings. How you're going to do that? That's exactly what I'm showing you in this video. I will explain how you can build and distribute your own Kasm Workspace images. It's a fun project and you will also learn more about Docker, which is an important technology in the IT industry. So let's take a look at building Docker images for Kasm Workspace. As I said, we are building this on top of my Kasm Workspace server that I've already shown you in my previous video. So if you don't know Kasm yet, you should watch my first video about it right after this one, because there I have covered the installation procedure and showed you how that tool generally works. So I'm not covering all of that stuff here again, I'm mainly just focusing on the Docker images part. And I hope you're already familiar with Docker and how containerization works. Otherwise, I've done videos about these topics as well. And by the way, if you like the videos and you think they're useful and you enjoy watching them, please do me a favor and leave a like and subscribe to the channel. That would be really cool. Let me still quickly give you an overview and show you how my setup works so we are all on the same page. For example, here I'm running Kasm Workspaces on my Proxmox server as a virtual machine. And when I log into the web interface, I can administrate my Kasm Workspace server, manage users and groups, see statistics and log in as a user to run Linux desktops or applications. Let's run this Ubuntu desktop, for example. That will now start and run a fresh new Docker instance and stream it through the browser to my PC. And that only takes 1 or 2 seconds to load until you have this isolated Linux desktop running. We can open any applications like VS Code that I often used for writing and researching code, or OBS Studio, for example, to record stuff inside this container. That all works pretty well and smooth. Now Kasm has done a pretty great job to build this with most wanted and most common applications you might need, such as browsers, productivity apps and Linux desktops based on Ubuntu and CentOS. But of course, there will be always some applications that you might miss here or customizations you want to inject into these images. And to do that, we can easily modify these existing images in Kasm to build our own ones. But first we need to understand how Kasm distributes these images for their own platform, and on their website you can read more about the Workspace images. As you can see, Kasm maintains these container images in 2 different versions. A static version to release and a rolling image that's rebuilt nightly. So the last one is always up to date and that gives you probably the most security, while the versioned images are probably better for compatibility. And these images are all open source and customizable. So you can take a look at these images like the core one, the desktop, or any of the application images that you see. All the projects are on GitHub. For example, this is one of the Workspace core images, the Ubuntu 20.04 image that rolls out an Ubuntu desktop in Docker. And even though this looks pretty complicated, you don't need to deal with all of this because we are not rebuilding the same stuff that Kasm has already done for us. For example, the core images of Kasm always includes something like a web server where you can connect to, so that is needed to stream the Linux desktop environment through the browser. And all of this stuff, this is of course already present in the Kasm image. And we really don't want to change all of this stuff, we just want to take that core image as our source image and then add our customizations to it. To do that, we are of course using Docker, and if you like to follow my examples here in this video, on my personal GitHub page you will find a repository that's called Hackbox. So that's basically my own Kasm Workspace image that I've built based on the Ubuntu core image of Kasm. And I just added a few customizations, like I changed the wallpaper, added a new terminal application, the Starship prompt, nerd fonts, all the cool stuff that you probably already know from my desktop PC and WSL2 setup. It's currently work in progress, so I might add a few more things from time to time, but I'll link you that repository in the description so you can check it out as an example. Okay, so I hope you got a pretty good overview and idea of what we're actually doing. Don't worry if you have never created your own Docker images, I'll try to explain all of the steps that are needed. And I quickly go over 2 steps that you need to prepare for that. First, you should sign up to a public container registry, because when you build your own Docker images on your PC, you usually want to upload them somewhere. That's also called pushing an image to a public container registry. The Kasm server will then pull it down, so this means downloading, because otherwise you would need to copy the images over to your server manually every time that you make changes to it. That's not really comfortable. If you know Docker, you should be also familiar with the Docker Hub, or you should at least know that you can find Docker images there, but you can of course also upload or push your own Docker images. That requires you to set up an account. And in my Docker Hub account, for example, you can see I have uploaded a few images already. Just to let you know, there are of course also other container registries existing, like GitHub has their own registry, or the Quai registry made by Red Hat. That's also a pretty popular example. Some people might also prefer to run their own private container registry, but I just like the official Docker Hub, as they offer a free tier to upload unlimited public repositories. The private and professional tiers cost some money. But yeah, that's nearly the same on every public container registry. I guess most of them cost money when you want to host private images. But as Docker Hub has this free tier, so you can just sign up to the Docker Hub, and you can also connect it very easily via Docker Desktop or the Docker CLI to push your images to it once you've built them. Speaking about Docker Desktop, that's by the way the next step. So you need to install Docker to be able to build images on your PC. And Docker Desktop is probably the easiest way to get it working on Windows, because Docker Desktop integrates very well into WSL2. So that's perfectly integrated with the Windows terminal and the PowerShell. So I've made several videos about my setup and WSL2 customization, so I'm not going over this here again, and I guess most of you already know it. But if not, you still find good instructions on the official Docker website, how to download and install Docker Desktop in Windows, or just use Docker on Linux. And I'll also link you my beginner videos about Docker in the description, so you can have a look if you're stuck somewhere. Okay, so let's summarize. You need a working Docker environment on your PC so that you can run, build and push your images. You should have an account created on Docker Hub or any other public container registry where you can upload your images. And you should, of course, have a Kasm server deployed. So when you got all this stuff ready, you can now start with this project. And I first want to quickly show you how to build a very simple Docker image, just that you get an idea of it, because you need to know some basics. Every Docker image contains of at least one specific file that is called the Docker file. And this file contains all necessary instructions that the Docker program should use to build the image. These instructions can be anything, so they can be commands, files that should be copied into the image, permission settings, applications, and so on. So here, for example, I have created a new project folder that I've called Hackbox, and in this folder I have created this Docker file. So this is just a text file without any file extensions, and here we can start adding our instructions. Usually when you're creating a Docker file, you'll start with a source image, so you don't need to build a Docker image really from scratch. And Kasm has also created a pretty good starting guide to build custom images based on their official ones. Because like I said, the Kasm images already have an integrated web server and all the necessary settings. Here you can see an example of a basic image built upon the Ubuntu core image Kasm maintains. So I have just copied this from the Kasm basic build example and pasted it into the Docker file of my project folder. If we take a closer look at these Docker file instructions, you will see they follow a specific syntax. So you will first always start with a from statement. So this tells Docker from which source image you want to build this. And the next statement, user, can tell Docker under which user it should run the container. And it seems that it's required for Kasm to run as a root user. So that's why they have defined it here. And the next statements define some environment variables that are necessary for Kasm Workspace and set the work directory to the home folder. So that work directory tells Docker in which directory it should execute all the following commands. So usually you don't need to change anything in here, just follow the official guides because they have already marked a specific section where we can add our own customizations. And I'll start with the first command. This is the run command. The run command tells Docker to execute the following command when the container image is built. So here we can add anything that installs packages or adds configuration settings. For example, in the first statement, I added an apt update command followed by an upgrade. So that will update all the installed packages in the Ubuntu image. And the next statement will install a new application. So in this container image, for example, I want to install OpenVPN. OpenVPN is a special application that might probably require some additional permissions, but this is how you usually install or add custom applications in your Docker image. However, you can of course use the Docker run command also for everything else that you want to execute on the shell, so we will later also do that as well. But first I want to show you how to copy files into the container image because I don't like the official wallpaper of Ubuntu. I want to upload my own favorite wallpaper, the Mr. Robot one that you probably have already seen in some of my videos or on this screen here. So I have created a new folder in this project that I've called Assets, and here we can add any files. For example, this amazing wallpaper PNG file that I pasted in here. And now in the Docker file, we need to tell Docker to copy it from this asset folder into the location user share extra backgrounds and set the name to bg_default.png. So this is a file that is automatically loaded as your default wallpaper in the Ubuntu image. Okay, so let's summarize it. We have updated the packages in the image, we have installed a custom application and uploaded a file as my new wallpaper. Now we can take this Docker file and build an image from it. And to do that, I've opened my PowerShell into this project folder. Just know that when you've installed Docker Desktop, you can execute these commands directly in PowerShell or in WSL2, doesn't really matter. And the command to build a Docker image is called docker build and then -t, and just put in the name of the Docker image. In my case, I will set the name to Hackbox. But be careful. When you want to push your Docker image later to a public registry, you should also add your username that you have used in Docker Hub in front of this. So this tells Docker the image belongs to your account. And you should also give this Docker image a tag. So this can identify specific versions of images or separate branches. You should have already seen that in other Docker images, for example. If you don't specify a tag, Docker will always use the tag latest, so that stands for the latest upload of that image. But you could of course also use something else like version 1, version 2 and so on. And now in my case, I will use the tag development because this is currently work in progress. And at the end, you will need to enter the directory where the Docker file is located. Because I'm currently in the same directory as the Docker file, I can just enter a dot. So this stands for the current work directory. And then just confirm it. So now Docker starts building your image, and in the logs you can see what it does. It uses the Kasm web core image of Ubuntu. This is the source image in the from statement. And then it simply executes everything that we have specified in the Docker file. So like setting the work directory or run commands to install the package updates and copy the Mr. Robot wallpaper from the asset folder into the image path. And if that was successful, you can enter the Docker images command to see all the images that are currently present on your PC. And here you can see another image now. Here we can see our Hackbox image we have available in different tags. So because I've already built this before with the latest tag, but this one is the Hackbox development image that we have just recently built. So now we have our image. We can now push this directly to Docker Hub and import it in Kasm. But before I want to do that, I want to test the image locally. And this is also done pretty easily because you can just run this Docker image like any other image. And to expose the web server and set the environment variables for Kasm, you will find the following command on my personal GitHub page. This will run a new Docker container and expose the web interface port on your local PC. Don't forget to use the correct image name and tag and paste in a password if you want to change it. And then just run this command and wait a few seconds. After the Docker container has started, you can now open it in your browser by accessing the localhost on port 6901 or whatever port you have defined in the command, and then log in with your username and the password. And here we have our Linux desktop. This is so cool. We have only changed the wallpaper and installed OpenVPN, so we haven't really done much in it, but that's of course already better than the default one. And now we can push this Docker image to Docker Hub. So you just need to log in with your credentials first. So type in Docker login, then enter your username and password, and then you can push this image to the public Docker registry. So just type in Docker push and the username, the image name and tag, of course, and that now uploads this image into your account. You can also see and verify that if that's finished. And here you can see my Docker image hackbox with the development tag was just updated recently, and now anyone can just download and use it. Docker is really amazing, and as you can see, building your own Docker images for Kasm, this isn't really difficult. But now we also want to add this in the Kasm server, of course, because we want to use it there. And in the Kasm server, there is a menu in the administration settings where we can add custom images. So go to images and then add a new one. The Docker image needs to be the full image name. Really important here, don't forget to add the tag, even if you're using the latest one, because without a tag, the Kasm server won't find it. So that's an issue I already ran into, so you don't need to make the same mistake. And then you can fill in the description, a name, maybe a thumbnail and resource limitations. Just enter everything according to your needs. What you also need to take care of is the Docker registry URL. So that should be index.docker.io in the version 1. So this tells Kasm to look for this image in the Docker Hub container registry. So when you're using something else like Quai or GitHub, then you would need to enter the URL of that other container registry, of course. Last step, enable it, and that should be all. Just know that you can also add some advanced executing configs, so that's probably needed to use OpenVPN, but for this example, I will just leave it aside and save the settings. And now we have a new entry in the workspace that's called Hackbox. The alert symbol means Kasm is still pulling this image down, so it hasn't finished the download of the image yet. And that can take some time depending on how big your image is, but after some time you can reload the page and check if it's downloaded. If this alert icon doesn't go away, that probably means Kasm couldn't pull your image. So you might have done something wrong with the image name, the tag, or the registry URL. That can be the case sometimes, but usually when you enter everything like I did in this video, it should work. Okay, so now I want to test it on my Kasm server. Let's start this workspace and launch a new session. And after a few seconds, here it is, our custom image is now working. So this is really cool. We can now use our custom image in Kasm, but still I want to do a little bit more. For example, we only have this boring default shell, and yeah, I'm missing a few interesting applications and configs that I want to have in my image. So let's continue editing it. Of course, you don't need to do the same stuff that I do, just experiment yourself what you can do here. And if you know Linux well, that shouldn't be a big problem for you. For example, I wanted to have my Starship prompt in this image, so I already made a tutorial about that. That's a really cool terminal customization tool. And to install Starship on Linux, you just need to download and execute an installation script. So that I could just copy from the official installation guide. And I just told Docker to download it with a wget command, so by just using run command. To execute this script, I also needed to make it executable with a change mod command and then simply run it. And of course, you also need to add a line into the bashrc file so that the Starship prompt is running when you start up a new session. I just used an echo command to add this line into the bashrc file. You can see Linux Bash is just magic. You can do so many cool things with it. And here you can also see my Starship config file, so that you can also find on my personal GitHub page, by the way. And I just added it into a new config folder here, copied it into the correct location, just like with the Mr. Robot wallpaper. And to display the custom icons in the shell, I've also used the nerd font. So that is downloaded with a wget command again. And when I've downloaded it, I also needed to unzip this file into the default font directory of Linux. So I also needed to install unzip. You can see whatever you want to do in this image, just add all this stuff. I also added the Terminator application, for example. This is an alternative terminal app for Linux that I could configure to use the nerd fonts as the default terminal font. I know I'm going over these steps pretty fast, but again, you should not just copy and paste what I've done here. You should try to experiment, try out what you like to have in your own image, and just have fun with finding it out yourself how it works. Anyway, once you've done all the changes, you can simply rebuild your image with the updated instructions by executing the same Docker build command again. So just like before, this will override the old image if you're using the same tag. You could of course also use a separate tag for every version, it's up to you how you're doing it. And finally, just push the updated image to the Docker registry. So now I could possibly just let you go and try it out yourself, but there's one more thing I need to show you, because when you updated the image, you need to manually tell Kasm to pull down the updated version, because if you just start a new session, it probably will just use the old image that's still present on the Kasm server. I don't know at which time it's pulling down the updates of the images. I guess at the next day it probably will see, okay, there was an update for this image, I need to download the new version. But of course we don't want to wait, so we can just log into the Kasm server via SSH and just execute the sudo docker pull command, so to download the latest version of our image. And when you then start a new session, you can see it has all the changes now. So for example, when I open the Terminator app that I've just installed, you can see it now runs with a Starship prompt that I've installed and added to my bash.rc file. And it's using my custom config for Terminator with the nerd fonts. This now looks exactly like on my PC with Windows Terminal and the PowerShell, except that the Terminator application is somewhat an ugly version of Windows Terminal. Man, I just like Windows Terminal so much. I can't believe that Linux doesn't have such a cool terminal application available. Please, Microsoft, make Windows Terminal available on Linux. That would be so cool. But yeah, this is how you can build your own custom Docker images for Kasm. I enjoy experimenting with that, and from time to time I log into my Kasm server and use this image. It's pretty cool. And I hope you also liked this video as well. Please tell me, what do you think about Kasm and Docker and what you're using it for? So just leave a comment. And as always, thanks everybody for watching. I will catch you in the next video. Take care. Bye bye.